Thank you, Sarah. Good morning. So it's been 5 years, right? I feel like we've had a lot of struggles in the city. We have seen that since the energy sector's gone down, we've had job losses, we've had wages decline, and it's spread much more beyond just the energy sector. We've had many businesses, small businesses, lost full impact. As we move into 2020, I wish I could say things are going to be different, but unfortunately, there's no magic bullet here. The fact is that the economy is still expected to struggle. What is starting to change is the differences in the housing market. So we're starting to see an adjustment to this new reality in housing. So before we go into some of the details of 2020, I think it's always good to take a look back and see quickly what happened in 2019. So last year at this time, we had forecasted that sales activity would fall slightly compared to last year, but prices would continue to come down. So what actually happened? Well, sales actually improved a little bit. Not much, but a little bit. And prices actually came down a little bit more than we expected. So anytime we do a forecast, we've always said, well, what changed? Well, last year, the biggest change was mortgage rates. Back at this time last year, it was expected that the Bank of Canada would raise their rates 2 times. Didn't happen. In fact, they kept their lending rate the same. And what we actually saw is that the residential mortgage rates that were offered by lenders started to come down. So that, in combination with the fact that prices started to come down at a faster pace, started to improve some sales activity. Another big change is there was actually stronger job growth last year. So originally the forecast was showing about a 1% growth in jobs. We actually had a 4% job growth last year. So that is helping support some of the activity last year, and it will start to play into this year as well. So another key difference that we started to see last year, of course it's never just straightforward, is that even though sales activity improved slightly, there was a big difference in the market if you're talking the under 500 versus the over 500,000 segment. So what we saw is in the under 500,000, sales activity actually improved by 7%. So that side of the market was doing much better. Supply levels were coming down. The months of supply started moving down a bit. So when that happens, that can help support an environment that's showing much more stability in pricing. The opposite was happening on the higher end of the market. So at the higher end, we actually saw that sales activity fell by 9%, and supply levels were getting quite higher. So what we saw is that actually conditions were getting a little bit worse. So that tells me that you have a market with very different trends depending on the price ranges that you're actually in. Now, I think it's also good to look at, I think this gives you a bit of an image of what's happening. All of the data was very consistent. So if we looked at the detached market, on this map here, you can see the light pink. Those areas had price declines that were under 2% compared to the previous year. Coincidentally, they also had, those were the most affordable districts in the city. So we're seeing that consistency. Meanwhile, on the west side, we're seeing price declines that were a little bit higher, and then of course the city center. So what is another good thing that as we move into 2020, why I care about this stuff, is looking at some of the shifts and trends that we also saw. So even though we saw that prices did come down and it ranged by area, the months of supply started to trend down. So we started to see, at least on the whole, except for in a few districts, the most expensive ones, that things were starting to get a little tighter. Not a lot, it's nothing like 2014 by any means, but at least it's a shift towards some improvement. And that will help lead to at least slower price declines as we move forward. Now, is it really a surprise that we're seeing this shift towards the more of the affordable? Not really. If we think about what's happened in the economy, as I said before, we had job losses, we've had wage decreases. When I look at what's happened on the whole, over the past 5 years, we still have more people working today than we did back then. But that composition has changed. Most of the job growth, half of it, has been in healthcare, education, and government. Okay, the other 40% has been in industries that have traditionally lower pay. Now, one good thing that we've seen is we're starting to see some of those professional, scientific, and technical jobs come back. What's interesting, though, is that they're coming back at lower wages. And plus, the job numbers don't always give you that indication of how many people are still working, but earning a lot less. When we look at household incomes today, are 7% lower than what they were in 2014. So it's not a surprise of the shift that we're seeing in the market. Another big change that we started to see last year is we're starting to see supply adjustments in the market. So that monthly supply number has been starting to come down. That again is a good thing, because that does point to some transition in our market, which will help support more stability in prices. Is it enough? Not quite yet. Okay, we're still continuing to see that downward pressure on pricing. So what do we expect for 2020? The reality is, as I said, things aren't changing much, but we do expect to see sales start to improve. When prices start to fall, that brings demand back into the market. So we do expect to see a moderate sales growth. Now, let's put some perspective. At the under 17,000 units, that's still a lot lower than the over 20,000 that we got used to having. But this is what I'm referring to as this new adjustment, settling in to these slower levels of activity but seeing some modest improvements. Now, when it comes to pricing, we don't expect to see prices move up this year. There still is just too much supply, not just on the resale, but you've got that competition from the new home side that's influencing prices. I also would expect that some of those similar trends that we've seen with very different activity and different price ranges will persist this year. So let's talk about some of the factors that go into this. First of all, the energy sector. Reality is, there hasn't been much change. There's been a lot of discussion of what oil prices will do this year, especially with some of the geopolitical tensions that we're having. The challenge is, can Alberta capitalize on it? We still face struggles when it comes to pipelines, market access. Because of that, we had the production cuts that came in, various different regulations. All of this is impacting energy investment. What I found interesting is that, we know where energy investment has gone down. It was 39 million in the oil sands back in 2014. Estimates this year are roughly 12 million from 2019, so that's a big drop in investment activity. What's interesting is that oil and gas investment is actually increasing on a global stage. It's just not happening here. And that is part of the situation that we're facing. And this year with the production cuts, we've seen a lot of that impact span beyond Calgary. We have also further struggles in natural gas. Now this is important because it impacts our overall economic health. It influences our GDP numbers. What we saw is that, as we move into 2020, some of these things are expected to change, but this is not a fast change. Okay, so how does it influence our overall economy? Well, in 2019, some of those production cuts that we saw, some of that pullback, that slowed our growth. And numbers aren't final yet. It can be either a small positive or a mild recession. The reality is there's not much change. Now, as we move into 2020, the expectation is that growth is supposed to be a little bit better, in that range of about 2%. Now, part of that is because some of those production curtailments that are in place are expected to ease. That should help support some more growth. Other factors is improved access through rail. That sort of stuff will actually help improve our growth as we move forward. And of course, the general expectation is that Trans Mountain is going to get built. And that should create some growth as we move into this year, as construction continues. Now, when it comes to housing, I'm always most concerned about how does this translate into employment. So what we saw last year in employment activity is, there was a different story. Calgary, for the first time, so people always say, where is that positive? We actually improved last year. So we had that employment growth of 4%. Provincially, that wasn't the case. Provincially, our growth was very minimal. We actually saw some of that pullback in employment happen in the rest of the province. So that's where we were seeing some declines. Edmonton still managed to stay somewhat positive, but they saw some pullbacks in the last few quarters of the year. So why does that matter? Well, and some of it is perspective. Calgary went through the adjustment first. When we first saw the energy sector slow down, we saw the impact on jobs almost instantaneously. The rest of the province wasn't doing as bad. With the production cuts, we saw that span through other areas of the province. Now, unemployment rates have generally gone down. They've trended down in Calgary compared to what they were, but we're still by far back to the market. So what's expected in employment as we move into 2020? Overall, employment levels are not really expected to change much. They're going to be fairly flat. However, and unemployment rates are expected to rise again. So why are they rising? Well, because when you don't have a lot of job growth and your labor force is supposed to increase, then that will essentially cause unemployment rates to go up. Now, I bet some of you are wondering, well, how can sales improve, even if it's a slight bit, when this is happening? Well, in part, because we had such strong employment growth last year, that will flow into our housing market into this year. It'll be enough to support some of that improved sales activity. But again, this is another reason why we don't expect to see much in pricing. Now, as we look into 2020, it's always important to see, well, what's happening in the differences between the types of market, and where is that job growth coming from? Well, most of the job growth, like, we can break it down almost into two parts of it. There's the parts that are really driven by what's industry, so construction, transportation, and warehousing. Other areas are professional and scientific services. Okay, so that's a good source of growth, but naturally it comes with a level of risk. Okay, that growth is based off the fact that production curtailment should ease, progress on pipeline construction, and improved transport by rail. So things like that are supposed to support job growth in that area. Other areas that there's supposed to be some job growth are healthcare and education. I'd say that has some risks to it, especially given the shifts that we're seeing on provincial budgets. Will it be enough to sustain that growth? So I think that even with the job numbers, we have to keep in mind there is a level of risk associated with the growth that's expected this year. But in terms of the housing market is concerned, we still benefit to a certain extent because of that 4% full-time job growth that we really had in 2019. Another factor that's important when we think about the housing market is population growth. This is an area that it's shifted. We actually have people, there's still more people coming into this city than leaving. Now, it's at a slower pace. So we are seeing this adjustment to slower levels. We've had migration numbers that are in around that 10,000 per year. It has also shifted. We see much more migration occurring from international sources versus coming in from other provinces. But it's at a lower level. So we kind of got used to that 20-some thousand migrants coming in every year, 3.5% population growth. So now we're shifting to lower levels, but we're comparable to a lot of other cities in this country. This is, this considered more normal population growth. Just that we sometimes lose that perspective. Because in Alberta, we got used to that fast growth. We got used to that sort of booming economy. And now we're moving into this slower type of growth. And this is consistent. Now, the population growth that we have started to see it influence our supply levels, particularly in the rental market. So the rental market is where we're seeing those vacancy rates are starting to drop. That's reducing supply in the overall market. It will start to support some more rent increases, at least less rent incentives being provided, and that will eventually start to translate into improved ownership as well. Another factor that's important when it comes to the housing market is what's happening in lending rates. Now, we know that when the stress test came in 2018, we saw that impact on our housing market. Rates, thankfully, last year did not go up. In 2019, they stayed low. And then we actually saw those residential mortgage rates coming down. So as I said before, that really started to encourage some sales activity, especially when you combine it with those lower prices. Now, as we move into this year, there has been different expectations. Because Canadian growth is not expected to be that strong, the general thought is that, at best, Bank of Canada will maintain their rates, but many people are also expecting Bank of Canada to actually cut their overnight target rates this year. So, the way I look at it, some of those spreads on the residential mortgage rates, they really came down in 2019. The expectation is some of those spreads will move up higher again as we move into 2020. But at the same time, when those rates are expected to increase is later in the year. So in the spring market, we're still facing a very favorable lending environment. So that's going to support some sales activity as we move forward. Supply is really an important factor when we think about what happens in our housing markets. And what we are starting to see is that those level of new listings, they've been coming down. That really helps reduce that amount of supply in the market. and especially relative to sales. So it takes a lot longer. Supply adjustments are not short. They take a long time before they start to influence the market, but at least we're seeing them. We're seeing that, listings are coming off, and it makes sense. If people can't get the price that they wanted for their home, they're going to decide to hold off. And we've been seeing that happening with new listings that they've been coming off in the market. And at the same time, this has started to bring down inventory levels. Now, are they low enough? Not really. We still have a lot more inventory on the resale side than we traditionally have seen, and that's one of the reasons why it's still having those influence on pricing. One of the challenges in the market is not just the resale inventory, but what's happening on the new home side. I think it's interesting, if you look at the graph on the right, that's the under construction levels as well as the new home inventory combined with the resale inventory. What I find interesting is look where most of that under construction product lands. That's really in that apartment sector. Now, what is interesting is a lot of the new home builders are shifting to a much more affordable product. We're also seeing much more rental construction. So all of those that green bar, 33% of that product under construction in apartments is rental. So we are seeing a shift in that there is going to be more rental construction versus just ownership. But this is still product that you're competing with. So this is product that is, and frankly, prices on the new home side have come down enough that it is drawing some demand away from the resale side of the market into the new. So we're seeing a bit of that shift. Another thing that I like to look at is how much supply is there relative to how many new households are being formed. So household formation is kind of one of these numbers that it's basically based on a combination of population growth and migration and, new people, young demographics, people moving out of their basements, sort of idea. Parents' basements. So what we're seeing there is those household formation numbers are really interesting when you layer it into how many starts are happening. What we saw in 2018 is there was more households being formed than new starts. Right? So this in part led to some of that inventory decline. It contributes to there being less supply on the market. What is a bit concerning is that starts have been fairly strong. So even in 2019, it was actually trending down for most of the year until the last month of the year. We just saw a huge spike in starts. So it does take time for these starts to show up on the market, but the concern becomes, or the risk associated with this, is that level of starts activity and compared to the households being formed, it could really put some limits on resale pricing. Because if you've got more supply coming on from the new home side, and you just don't have enough new households being formed to pull off that supply, it's going to prevent some of that resale pricing from moving up. So this is one of the reasons why we don't feel that we'll see price improvements as we move into this year. So what's happening with pricing? We have had a fairly significant adjustment in prices. From 2014 to today, that's been about a 10% price adjustment across the entire market. Now, as we move into this year, we do feel that, again, prices on an annual level will be slightly lower. We could start to see some stabilization. We don't expect it to be consistent across the market. So that stabilization, potentially even in some modest improvements, might occur at the lower end of the market. The higher end of the market we expect will continue to struggle. But as those prices come down in the higher end of the market, that should start to bring back more buyers as well. I think it's important to put some perspective to prices. Yes, they've gone down from 2014, but are all your buyers, did they all purchase their home in 2014? There still has been some appreciation, and it's really about when did they come into the market. If they purchased near 2011, 2012, they've still had appreciation. So it's always important to give that context. It really comes down to what cycle did you come into this market. And it's often beyond more than just the current price adjustments that we've seen. Regardless, all property types are still oversupplied. By far, the apartment sector, again, because of all of that new home construction, it's not a surprise that the apartment sector has been the most oversupplied. Attached has been somewhere in the middle. The attached sector is where we've actually been seeing some improvements this year. It's actually had the strongest sales growth this year, but it's still taking a while to get rid of all that supply. The detached market, it really went into oversupply pretty much when that stress test came in, is when we really saw those levels shoot up. But we're starting to see the adjustments in the market. So the overall, the months of supply are starting to trend down. Now, there's still oversupply. It's going to take time, but they're moving in the right direction. And as they start to move down, that should ease that amount of downward pressure on pricing. Doesn't mean that it's going to be prices are all of a sudden going to go up, but at some point it will start generating some stability in pricing, and it'll prevent steeper declines. Okay? When we look at the three sectors, we've seen that sales activity really, the improvements in the past year were driven by the attached market. As we move into next year, we do expect improvements across all three districts. But, again, pricing is a bit of a different story. We'll continue to face pricing challenges across all three of those sectors. And as you can see, the amount of price decline really does vary depending on product type and location, compared to those highs in 2014. The apartment sector has by far taken the most adjustment in prices. At some point, prices won't adjust anything. I mean, at some point you hit a balance between cost, right? So we are expecting to see that pace of decline should start to ease as we move into this year. So when you do forecasts, as I've always said, there's risks. So one of the things that I look at, and the things that I'm concerned about as I think about the next year, first of all, global risks. There is a lot of uncertainty in this market. There's a lot of concerns over what's going to happen in the US economy. Are they going to grow? Are they going to move into a recession? We're seeing global growth starting to slow a bit. This is creating anxiety amongst investors, and it's just causing people to hold off. So, officially, recession is not expected in the US, but slower growth is expected to kind of persist. So, what risk does that have to us? Well, it's really about how does this influence energy markets as well. So, as I said, we might have some energy price volatility this year. I think that's generally expected, but it's about how will that we can't necessarily capitalize on it, but it's about really what progress are we going to have with regards to pipelines, production curtailments, transport by rail. These are the three areas that are supposed to support employment growth. So if we don't see those improvements this year, it's going to be pretty hard to see that translate into improvements in jobs. So this is an area that I view as some risk. The other aspect of job growth, as I mentioned before, when you have some of your job growth that's fueled from education and healthcare, I'm a bit concerned about that. Because the reality is we have had provinces that are cutting their budgets, they're changing things. Is that really going to support that type of employment growth moving forward? Not sure. Okay, so that's something as a risk. On the positive side, sometimes there's some positive risk. One of the comments is that there's been a lot of discussion for regional policy in terms of the stress test. If that can actually happen, no question that'll support growth in our housing market. Okay, so if they can remove some of that barrier, we should see improved sales activity, more stability in prices, even potential growth. But that has to happen first, and again, I can't say what odds are of that. Okay, but that is something that can be a positive upside risk. Another thing that is more of a downside risk, again, is those starts numbers. That level of new home product that keeps coming on the market that you're competing with, if it's going to continue to pull demand away from the resale side onto the new home side, then you can see really some of those, that resale activity has slower sales growth than we expect. Okay, so that's another risk. Another thing is I think there's been a fundamental change in consumer preferences. So because we've gone through such a long period of slow growth, people are a little bit more cautious. They don't necessarily want to spend as much. They're concerned about, will they still have their job? What is their future income growth? All of a sudden there might be some of this realization that home prices don't increase as fast as they used to. I mean, you have to think, people in this city got very used to price growth that was above normal compared to what you had in any other Canadian city. So when you've got 10% annual price growth a year, people didn't have to think much about that decision. You could purchase a home and you could get out of it. If you wanted to in a few years and still make a profit. Well, that's changed a bit, right? Right now it's a lot harder. Decisions have to be made with more caution. And so it's shifted a bit in the consumer's mentality in terms of what their preference will be for housing moving forward. Now, one thing I want to point out, because I don't try and be negative, I really don't, but one thing that I found interesting is that there was, in partnership with Attainable Homes Calgary, Alberta Real Estate Foundation, and CREB, there was a market survey conducted last year. And I thought the results were really interesting. So one of the things that we've seen is that, they interviewed basically, they did a survey on moderate income Canadians that are currently in the rental market. That thought that new millennials, people coming up, do not want ownership, well, this proved that it's not really the case. In fact, 81% of those renters still value home ownership. Home ownership is important to them, and that's not expected to change. What's interesting is they also said, why do they value home ownership? And basically the three top reasons why they valued it all was related to housing stability. So when you think about housing stability, well, what does that mean? Well, that means they want to form that community. They want a place where their kids go to school that's consistent. Another thing they said is they like that idea of a personal investment in home ownership. So they want to be able to invest in themselves versus in a landlord. And the last point that they made was cost certainty. They liked the idea that they didn't have to worry about their rents going up. So why does this matter? Because it tells me a couple things. First of all, it tells me that home ownership is far more about just current market conditions. It's about a lifestyle choice. It's beyond that. It's about long-term goals. And Calgary still has a lot of benefits. We're still a city of over 1 million people. We're more affordable than Toronto or Vancouver. And there's a lot of reasons why people still continue to want home ownership in this market. So with that, I'd like to thank you, and I'm going to have Sarah up to help answer some questions.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. Now, a bunch of you have uploaded questions to our forecast app, so please keep them coming.